Providence blesses their communion in suffering to fit them for communion in love and holy living. How can fellow sufferers but have a fellow feeling for one another? 2 Corinthians 1 verse 7 and 1 Thessalonians 2 verse 14. Having drunk of the same cup of suffering, must they not desire to drink of the same cup of blessing and thanksgiving? The process by which they are refined also prepares them for uniting, by consuming or separating the dross and tin and clay of corruption, which kept them asunder. Put many pieces of metal together into the furnace, and when they are melted, they will run together, says a pious writer. Matthew Henry on Ezekiel 37, verse 21. When the Hebrews in Egypt smote and strove with one another, and spurned the mediatory office of Moses, who would have set them at one again, it was a proof that the time of their deliverance was not yet come, and that they needed to be kept longer in the iron furnace. It was when the sons of Jacob were suspected as spies in Egypt, and harshly treated, and thrown into prison, that they remembered their treatment of Joseph, with whom they had dealt cruelly, as a spy on their conduct, and feelingly expressed their compunction in the presence of their offended, but forgiving and tender-hearted brother. Bishops Hooper and Ridley had a warm contest in the reign of Edward VI. But when, in the time of the Bloody Mary, they were thrown into the same prison and had the prospect of being brought to the same stake, they lovingly embraced, and Ridley readily professed his contempt for that ceremony which, with intolerant eagerness, he had imposed on his reluctant brother. The affair of the public resolutions during the Second Reformation in Scotland caused a very hurtful schism in the Presbyterian Church, and those who protested against the measure had church censures inflicted on them by the ruling majority. But after the Restoration, when the religion and liberties of the nation were overturned, and the arm of persecution was stretched out against both parties, some of the leading promoters of the resolutions had their eyes opened, and candidly confessed that their protesting brethren had acted a wiser and more upright part than themselves. A confession honorable to faithfulness, and 1,000 times more creditable to the persons who made it than if they had stood stiffly to the defense of their conduct after the event had shown its faultiness, or if, covering self-love with the cloak of forbearance, they had insisted on consigning the affair to silence and oblivion. When God grants a common deliverance to those who are exposed to similar sufferings and dangers, He throws around their hearts the cords of love, and draws them together, as with the bands of a man. The powers of hell and earth combined could not have severed the 3 young captives that came up from the burning fiery furnace, linked together in chains of a very different kind from those which the flames had recently consumed. Lovely and pleasant in their lives, what a spectacle must they have afforded in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation among whom they walked as lights. In the field of modern church history, I do not know a spot on which the mind rests with a more pleasing emotion than that which describes the deputation sent by the Waldenses of Bohemia to congratulate and establish concord with the first reformers of Germany and Switzerland. The candor with which that interesting and simple body of Christian confessors stated the faith and religious practice which they had so long retained and held fast in the jaws of persecution, and the ingenuous and meek spirit with which they received the advice and admonition of their more enlightened brethren. The harmony of confessions in the Protestant churches and their mutual correspondence and cooperation evince the unanimity and goodwill by which they were actuated at the era of the Reformation from Popery. It is true that a dispute early arose between some of the leading reformers, which was managed with unbecoming violence and obstinacy by at least one of the parties. But it was confined to a single article, and did not lead to an irreparable breach until after their death, when there had arisen a generation which knew not the mighty works which the Lord had done in rescuing their fathers from anti-Christian darkness and bondage. I need not dwell on the effect which emancipation from a popish and hierarchical yoke had, at different periods, in uniting the friends of religion and reformation in our native land, and in exciting them to seek the extension of this blessed union and conjunction to other Christian churches. It were presumptuous to limit divine sovereignty, or to prescribe an invariable mode of action to the Almighty and All-Wise. But, brethren, as often as I reflect on these things and survey the present state of the Church of Christ, the thought still recurs forcibly to my mind. Surely we must be made to pass through some fiery trial before we shall be refined from those corruptions which have defaced the beauty and eaten out the power of religion, and before we shall be fitted for becoming one in the hand of the Lord. Lastly, in healing the divisions of the church, God has cemented and consecrated the parties by disposing them to give the most solemn pledges of their fidelity to himself and to one another. It was predicted that the return from the captivity and the conjunction of Judah and Israel should be distinguished by such exercises. In those days and at that time, saith the Lord, the children of Israel shall come, they and the children of Judah together, going and weeping. They shall go and seek the Lord their God. They shall ask the way to Zion, with their faces thitherward, saying, Come, and let us join ourselves to the Lord, in a perpetual covenant that shall not be forgotten. Jeremiah 50, verses 4 and 5. How exactly the event corresponded to the prophecy you may see by consulting the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. Public vows and religious covenants formed no part of Jewish peculiarity. They did not belong to the ceremonial law. It would be something worse than an absurdity to describe them as oaths of allegiance to Jehovah, as the political head of the nation of Israel. They are not more unsuitable to the character of the Christian church than they were to that of the Jewish. Accordingly, it is expressly foretold in many prophecies that such solemn exercises shall take place in New Testament times. Isaiah 19, verses 18 and 21, Isaiah 44, verses 3 through 5, Isaiah 45, verse 23, Jeremiah 4, verse 2, Zechariah 2, verse 11, and Zechariah 13, verse 9. These predictions have been verified and fulfilled at different periods and in different countries, and in none have they been more eminently fulfilled than in our own land, especially in times of reformation and union. When peace has been restored between contending nations, it is common for them to renew their former compacts of amity and to repeat the solemnities by which they were originally ratified. What more seasonable for those who have long been divided by their own sins and the divine anger than to humble themselves before God and to ask of Him a right way? And what more fitting for expressing their gratitude and cementing their union than a joint dedication of themselves to God, accompanied with solemn pledges of mutual fidelity?